In the city of Texarkana, a small city in between the borders of Texas and Arkansas, where the names of the cities came from, lies a mystery that has yet to be solved. During a period of 10 weeks from February to May of 1946, a murderer known as the Phantom Killer would strike the civilians of Texarkana, killing 5 and harming 3 others. But just as rapidly as he appeared, he quickly disappeared, leading many in the city to try and figure out the mystery of who could have possibly killed the 5 people in such a small city. These killings caused the town to be afraid of what might happen each night, leading them to Dread Sundown. 30 years later, the slasher film movement is beginning to gain its massive foothold over horror, and many slasher films are being released after the unexpected success of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And because of how successful the film was, every single filmmaker with half a budget was trying to create their own version, with them being extremely cheap and generally having huge profits. And because of that, in 1976, Earl Smith and Charles B. Pierce decided to adapt the real-life murders into a slasher film that they called The Town That Dreaded Sundown. So what are my thoughts on the film, you may be asking? Well, before we get any further, remember to like and subscribe if you liked the video, and let me know your thoughts down below, and let me know if you would like more videos like this one. Now let's get on with the actual video. Before talking about the movie, we need to talk about the backstory behind it, so you can get a better understanding of what we are trying to cover in this essay. So viewer discretion is advised, as the things we will be covering are quite shocking and disturbing. You have been warned. Jimmy Hollis, 25, and his girlfriend, 19-year-old Mary Jean Larry, are parked on Lover's Lane after a night out in Texarkana. But things that night would never be the same for them, as a man in a white pillowcase with eye holes cut out appeared at their door with a flashlight. The man proceeds to tell him to listen and get out of the car. Upon doing as he was ordered by the masked assailant, Hollis would be struck twice with the man's gun in the back of the head, making a noise so loud that Mary thought Hollis had been shot, but it was actually his skull fracturing. To try and get out of it, Mary showed the assailant Hollis's wallet, but that's not what he wanted, so he told her to run, whereupon catching her, he brutalized her and then left her for dead on the side of the road. However, both survived, getting to nearby citizens to call the police for them, and while Mary Jean was hospitalized overnight, Hollis had to be hospitalized for several days due to a huge skull fracture. The police would then begin their investigation, not believing Larry's story, as they believed that she in fact knew the attacker and had been a part of the cover-up and didn't investigate into it much after that. However, nearly a month later on March 24th, a similar situation would happen with Richard Griffith, 29, and his girlfriend Polly Ann Moore. However, they would not be as lucky as the first two, as the assailant had shot Griffin twice in the back of the head, as well as Moore. This showed the police in the area that he was escalating, so the police would start doing a major search around the city of Texarkana, with both Texas and Arkansas police getting involved, as well as the FBI. In a somewhat shocking display, one of the ways the police tried to get the killer to come out of the woodwork was by having the police officers and teenagers staged in cars as couples in order to see if he would strike again. And strike again he would, with Paul Martin, 17, and Betty Booker, 15, as they drove home from a musical performance that night. First found was Paul, as he was found first dead on the side of the road, where he had been shot 4 times, and only a couple of hours later, Booker would also be found dead in the forest a couple of miles away from where Paul had been found. She would be found with 2 bullets in her as well. Then 3 miles away from Booker, they found the car outside the park with the key still in the ignition. This caused the town to go into a blind panic, as they now know there was most definitely a serial killer within the town. Because of this, the town started issuing curfews, as well as families arming and putting security measures on their homes. Then on May 3rd, the 5th and final murder happened, when in their homes Virgil Starks and his wife, Katie, 37 and 36 respectively, were staying in their home, having a normal evening. Then suddenly, while reading the newspaper, Virgil was shot twice in the back of the head. Katie, seeing her husband's now slumped body, calls the police, before she herself was shot twice in the face from the exact same window. With what little strength she had, she ran over to her neighbor's house, A.V. Prater, and said that her husband was dead before collapsing. Prater would take Katie to the hospital where she would survive. But because of all this, the town was sent into a blind panic, making it so their distrust of one another was at an all-time high. Not one person in the town trusted each other anymore, as paranoia got the better of people as they didn't want to see anyone. Almost every family in the city got armed, and they would not let anyone near their homes out of fear that they might be the next victims of the serial killer. And many people who lived in the city at the time described it as a very dangerous period to be living there, as almost every house was armed and dangerous, as you could not get close to any of them without fear of being shot. However, to the confusion of everyone, this is where it all ended, and after that killing, there wouldn't be an attack by the killer ever again, and the town's fears would slowly subside as the Phantom Killer would fade into obscurity. Their fears would be put onto the big screen in 1976 with The Town That Dreaded Sundown. The Town That Dreaded Sundown is a low-budget slasher film that covers the main ideas of what happened in Texarkana that spring, but changes a couple things to make it more cinematic and also somewhat goofy, unfortunately. Most people know this film for one unfortunate change they make to the story, and that's the fact that for one of the scenes the killer uses the trombone used by Paul Martin, even though in real life he had been playing the saxophone, to kill Paul Martin and Betty Booker, almost mocking the real tragedy behind this horrific story. But besides that, the film does stick quite closely to what actually happened, and it's an okay film. For a slasher film before Halloween, it's crazy how well this film would have fit in with the other films in the slasher era, but the film's comedic bits somewhat throw me off while watching. I get that it's trying to figure out the legend behind the Phantom Killer, but these are real people that the film is talking about, and the murders that they are portraying are highly brutal, as I had to censor a lot of them because it's just so shocking what happens that in order to make this video a little bit more tolerable, I had to censor some of the details behind what actually happened. So it just kind of makes the comedic bits feel really, really wrong because it doesn't fit. It's a very, very real thing that happened, and it was extremely terrible what happened to these people. So the comedic bits don't really fit in with the rest of the film, as it's this really, really dark and atmospheric film, and then there'll just be a random joke halfway through the movie that doesn't fit whatsoever. But I don't want to discount this film entirely. There is good parts of the film. There's a lot of good stuff in it, like showing just how extreme the lengths the police did in order to try and catch him, how strange it was for him to just disappear off the face of the earth, always looking in the shadows, fearing that he might strike again. I think that's what makes the idea of the Phantom Killer in real life just so scary, as well as the Zodiac Killer like it, is how they just never got caught. The fact that you could have very well been a friend or a family member to that person that lived in that town, and you would never know. I think the idea of that is frankly extremely uncomfortable and horrific. It makes the story of the Phantom Killer that much more memorable. A serial killer terrors in a small town for a couple of months, then completely disappearing and never killing again. And I think the film captures that really well. The way that they show how everyone reacts to the killings, as well as showing how long it took to get anything done, and for it all to go nowhere, it makes for a scary thought. The film doesn't have much of a message, as we don't really hear much about the victims themselves. The film is more focused on the brutality of the slayings and less on the actual people whose lives were affected. And that makes the film a somewhat hard watch for me, as it makes it hard to watch when all it's showing is the horrific violence that actually happened to these people, and the occasional humor feels really out of touch and out of place. I cannot emphasize enough how much the humor in this film ruins it. It comes out of nowhere, and it doesn't really add anything to the movie besides, oh, funny moment, and it always seems to be when the atmosphere of the film is starting to get good. So I can't really recommend the film, as I think it's just a typical slasher with almost nothing to add in the conversation, besides just showing the horrific brutality of these slayings in the 1940s. And honestly, that's fine. I've seen way worse portrayals of real life events, and I think the way that the film, besides the weird comedic stuff, is okay. So would I recommend the film? Probably not. It's too boring to be a conversation piece, and it's not bad enough to at least be entertaining. It's just a below par slasher film, and it sucks that all of the ways that they could have portrayed such a horrific story, and they picked this one.